Yeah, they're gonna find.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm sorry to ruin your lunch. All right. But maybe you'll get a good nap in. So, you can do a service. First of all, I would just like to thank Stock Conn Riverman. I'm part of that, the group that learns the laws pertaining to monetary, and a lot of it is funded, from my understanding, from Stock Conn Riverman. We'd like to give a very warm shout out. Thank you very much. It's actually a very interesting topic. One that in a lot of ways is very unique, I think, to Jewish law versus the regular American judicial system. But I can't say that for sure. I'm not a lawyer. We definitely want to hear your opinion on it. This is, if we had to give a title, I would say it's more ethical transactions, but not in the sense of you're doing something illegal activity or fudging taxes or doing something like that. It's a very unique concept, which really pertains to, we all are aware that even in secular law, once there's a transaction that takes place and someone purchases something, I certainly can't come in and take that away from him. That would technically be considered stealing in most scenarios. But there's a series of rules that actually, the construct of the rule is really prior to the actual purchase, where someone is involved or pursuing a purchase. Is it legal for me to come and step in and try to steal that deal away from him? Right? We'll give you one example. We'll have a few case studies and we'll work our way backwards and try to see if we can come to some conclusion. Also, a disclaimer: nothing that I'm saying is final over here. Anyone has any questions, you should be asking your local Orthodox rabbi. Right? My brother is a lawyer. He's been a lawyer for 12 years. He was working 12 years in insurance defense. He was working for Kubicki Draper. I don't know if that's a law firm. It's a law firm, right? He was working for Kubicki Draper for 12 years. He made partner, and apparently, again, this is what he told me. We hope to think it's the truth, but his version of the story, at least, was that he was very successful at Kubicki Draper, and he represented a lot of the high-powered companies in America, Walmart, TJ Maxx, and there was multiple lawsuits from Morgan & Morgan that he went up against, and he won every single one of them. So Morgan & Morgan said, if we can't beat him, join him. So Morgan & Morgan gave him an offer under the table to come and lure him over to actually plaintiff, right? So he was doing insurance defense and he's switching sides. So the question that really is discussed from the Jewish aspect of it, is that considered legal? In other words, currently he's employed right now by Kubicki Draper. Is it legal for someone to come and to start soliciting and try to poach a worker away from his current firm to come join a different job? Is there any legalities?
I don't think so, unless there's a contract or something. I don't know. It's a
Yeah,
free market.
it's not illegal.
From
From
an American law perspective, it's not
No,
illegal.
if you have
No,
confidential
that's fine.
information.
What?
He couldn't divulge
Are you
confidential information, but he's allowed
I
to
mean,
switch
yeah, he
jobs.
would need to be,
He can switch jobs. Assume he's under contract.
Are you asking
Oh,
from
then
the
that-
poacher's point of view or from the employee's point of view?
From the poacher's point of view. In other words, is Morgan & Morgan going against any form or against any sort of law
there's no
that
criminal
inhibits
liability.
them?
If he has a contract, it could be tortious interference.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the only thing against
He's tortiously interfering
the poacher.
with the poachers.
With the poacher.
Potentially with the contract that
Yeah.
exists between the current employer and.
Okay, and I'm sure this story happens time and time and again. I'm sure this is probably a common story. Just happened to my brother, so I know it, right? He ended up he switched over to Morgan & Morgan. He did switch. He jumped fence and he went to Morgan & Morgan. Another case that would probably be very common is, let's say someone owns an apartment, a high-riser, and he has multiple different units, and there are different units that are up for rent. So you'll have multiple suitors that'll come and check out the apartment to potentially lease out the apartment. Now, let's say you have a scenario, and I'm sure this happened, right, where someone came to look at the apartment, and he was okay with the apartment, and let's say you bargained, you settled on the price. So for the sake of this discussion, we're going to say that the rent typically ranged. I mean, I don't know if this works in modern day society, but let's say in Israel, I don't know where you could actually bargain the price of your rent a little bit. So over here, let's say the rent was anywhere from 4 to 45, right? That was the standard lease agreement that they had, right, in their apartment complex. So they had someone call up. He looked at the apartment and he was okay with it. He was happy with it. He was willing to step forward He negotiated. They settled on 4K. Right? They call up. Deal's final. He speaks to the leasing department. Says no problem. The secretary's out. The second she's back, I'll have her forward the contract to you. You finish it up, and we'll close the deal. Right? But let's say that's at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Right? She's out for lunch. 12:30, they got a phone call from someone else that looked at the apartment, and he's willing to pay $4,500. He's willing to pay $4,500 for the apartment. Are they allowed to? Now, he initially made a commitment, right? He was willing to go forward at 4K with the previous tenant or the prior suitor, right? He was okay with that. He had no issue with the $4,000. But now it fell into his lap, another potential candidate, and he's willing to pay more. Can I, at that point, are there any restrictions for me to back out and now go to this new potential suitor?
Well, there's,
Floor's open.
American law?
Give whatever you think.
there's certain types
Sharia,
of contracts.
you know what I mean? Whatever you want.
There's certain type of contracts that are enforceable if they're oral. So if there was an actual oral contract and had all the
What constitutes an
elements-
oral contract? Just
well, in American law, there's like an offer, acceptance, and consideration. Those are like the three basic elements of a contract, where one person offers something to the other, and there's something, consideration means like there's something of value given in exchange, and the other person accepts it. I mean, there's like, you know,
it's
nuances to
right.
each of those elements of each of those, but but each state has what's called statute of frauds, where certain types of contracts have to be written, and including for like sale of land, like real estate contracts. So anything that is an oral contract, and there was an enforceable oral contract, you're not allowed to back out if you get a higher offer. But if it's something that has to be written, then even though it might be unethical, this is my opinion. I'm not like saying this is the fact of what all American law is. But yes, then if it's something that can be written and you only agree to it orally, then you can back out. Then I don't think there's legal consequences.
There's no legal consequences. Anyone else?
Well, that's why.
I mean, I agree with that. Unless there's like a Zelle or something that took place in between.
No, let's say there was no deposit.
But
Let's say there was
like,
not. I mean,
like something like, oh,
right?
I
No,
really
there was no
wanted to
security
send something.
deposit. It hasn't progressed further than just the commitment to go forward with it. Right? They agreed on the price. They settled. They're okay with the $4,000. He even said, "I'll tell the secretary to forward the contract to you the second she's back from lunch." But in the interim, someone else came in. A different suitor came in. So that would be case study number 2. Case study number 3, which is also in certain locales, is a very common case. I don't know where the general population over here, I don't know where you live, but in North Miami Beach, it's definitely in Lakewood, New Jersey, this certainly comes up. A lot of times when there's a high demand for a particular area on real estate, right? In North Miami Beach, in general, Orthodox Jews seem to have this issue, right, more often than not, because they're restricted to live in very, in certain locales. They can't really go further out. They need to be close to the synagogue or yeshiva, whatever it may be. So a lot of times the market, it shoots the real estate market way up, and people try to get off-market deals. So now what they do is that you'll approach a neighbor and you'll try to create some sort of relationship, some cookies and coffee, right? There's nothing that a good chocolate babka can't do for you, right? And they go and they work their way, and then over the course of 3-4 months, they'll try to create some sort of relationship, and then they'll eventually try to convince the person that's an elderly person that's living there that, maybe it's time for you, maybe you'd be interested in selling. You could get high value for your house, right? It's going to be worth a lot more if you sell it now. And they go through the whole process. So now, this happens all the time where you'll have one potential suitor, or in my instance, it didn't happen to me, but I was saying, let's say you lived in a certain neighborhood and you liked the neighborhood. You had been renting in that neighborhood, let's say, for 3-4 years. And now you've outgrown your apartment and you want to buy in that neighborhood. And you know of 1 or 2 houses that potentially could be sold. So you create the relationship and you put 3-4 months worth of effort into creating that relationship, all obviously with keeping in mind, right, that you're trying to eventually get the person to sell you the house.
We had a lesson where we were taught that if it's a Jewish neighborhood, you have to offer the property next door to a fellow Jew.
Right. That is true. That does come in. But in this instance, let's say the neighbor doesn't want to buy it.
Okay.
And really, the truth be told, over here, the house is not really up for sale, right? It's not on the market. You're trying to put it on the market, but it's not on the market.
But was
right?
he doing this work in reliance on a commitment made by the seller, would-be seller?
No, there's no. It's not on the
He's just
market.
doing it on his own.
He's doing it on his own, 100%. He's doing it. He's investing his own time, money, and energy, right? And he's hoping that he'll get the result. Eventually, let's just say, I mean, this happens. 3-4 months down the line, he gets them to commit to sell the house. Okay? He gets them to commit. So now they're in negotiations for how much for the purchase. Someone else gets wind of it, and this happens unfortunately all the time. A realtor will get wind of the fact that they're ready to sell now. He swoops in and he gives an offer and he just steals the deal. Right?
I had
He
this
steals
2
it.
weeks ago.
There you go.
I was chasing a guy for 3 years, texting him every holiday, saying how he's doing. And then I get up to, we were negotiating the price, and he's like, come meet me in person. I come in person. When I get there, I see a realtor there as well with the potential another buyer.
And he got the deal.
Yeah, well, the other buyer is paying $100,000 more.
Right. So now, in this case, what's the first person saying? Saying, listen, I invested all this time, money, and energy just to create this relationship. The only reason why they're even willing to sell is because of the effort that I invested into it. I really should have first dibs at this house. It's not right for you to come in. It's unethical, so to speak, for you to come in and take away a deal that after I invested all this time and money, right?
It's a procuring cause case, I know,
We had a case with a realtor also. He got the buyer, and then he let go of the deal, but then another realtor brought the same buyer. So under American law, he's still entitled as a procuring cause. But there's a dispute
really?
with him.
Commission on both?
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. So those are the 3 cases, you know, and this will come all the time if you're a restaurant and you find a storefront, right? And a lot of times, right, like all of you know, there are multiple different variables in every business that you have to take into account. The frontage, the parking, right, the square footage. All of these are variables that any business wants to ensure that they get for the highest degree of success. So if you find a certain storefront, right, and you feel that this storefront is very unique for whatever reason, the frontage, the area, the locale, the clientele that's there, right, for whatever it may be, and you're in negotiations right now on the price, and then someone swoops in and takes away from you, right? All these questions: are there any restrictions? Again, I want to hear the American judicial side of it, but from the halachic standpoint. So the Gemara brings up that in the Talmud we have a very interesting case. The Gemara it actually gives multiple different cases, but we're going to focus on one case in particular tonight. And I think, right, if with your permission, I think what we're going to do is try to give more of a panoramic view of the general laws that pertain to this field. And then if we could, obviously, like we said, there's going to be nuances in every single facet of it. And maybe if we could, we'll focus on one particular facet. So the Gemara brings down a very similar case. This is a real estate firm. I'm in the lion's den talking about real estate, you know, but the Talmud brings down the following scenario. There was an individual that was pursuing a specific plot of land. Now, at that time, he was doing it for agriculture. We're not talking about over here because he wants to build a high-riser and, you know, knock down 30 houses and build, 500 apartments, right? This is a plot of land for agriculture. So he was heavily pursuing it. And another individual who was unaware, he was completely unaware that there was already someone in negotiations, came in and bought the land, right? He offered a higher price, obviously, and the seller decided that he's going to sell to him. Now, he didn't do it maliciously. He had no idea, the Gemara Talmud brings out, he had no idea that there was a potential suitor for this, right? He didn't even know there was negotiations going on. He saw that it was listed for sale, and he came in, he put an offer down, they accepted his offer, and that was it, okay? So the first person, his name was Reb Gidol, he was very offended, right? Because especially, to make matters worse, the one that bought it was a close friend of his, right? So it hurt, right? And he was very offended. So he did what most people, he went to his therapist, right? He went to his therapist, the Gemara brings down, the Talmud brings down, and he went to a different rabbi and he complained. He said, listen, I was in the middle of hard negotiations on this land. He just swooped in from left field and took it away from me. So the Gemara the Talmud basically brings down that just to cut the story short, he eventually ended up meeting up, the therapist, who was a rabbi, ended up meeting up with the
Why are you calling him a therapist?
He's a rabbi.
You're just saying a rabbi is
I was a rabbi. Because the way that it says, Rabbi Gidol went to complain to him. He wasn't going for it. He says he just went to unburden his so when the rabbi bumped into the one that purchased the land, he asked him, he said, listen, he asked the following question. If you see a poor man who's actively trying to get a loaf of bread, right? He's poor, he has no money, right? He's standing on the street, you see him every day, he's holding that sign, military veteran, right? Somehow they're all military veterans. Military veteran, we're collecting money, right? And whatever it is. And then you see this guy in a bakery trying to buy a loaf of bread, right? It's the last loaf in the bakery. You go in, you know what he's doing. and you go in and you steal that loaf of bread. Not steal it, you purchase it, let's say, right? Have you done anything wrong? What would you think in that case? That's what he presented. That was the question he presented to the one that purchased the land. So the person said, the guy's evil. You see that there's a poor man trying to get a loaf of bread. You know exactly what he's trying to do. Why are you going and getting that specific loaf of bread? In fact, the Gemara says he's called a rasha. He's called evil. Now, and that has consequences in halacha. In the Shulchan Aruch brings down that someone who gets branded as a rasha, what we're allowed to do, someone who's evil, what we're allowed to do is that in a public setting, we're allowed to defame him, right? We're allowed to get up and say that this person, you should know, did such and such an activity, and it's completely unworthy, right? And we embarrass him basically. Now, obviously, we're doing it as a means to prevent further actions like this from spreading. So the Gemara says this was his response. The purchaser said, someone who steals a cookie from a guy, he's cruel, he's evil. So the rabbi told him, he said, I think you just called yourself evil, because the Gemara, he said this plot of land that you had purchased, the individual Reb Gidol was in strong negotiations, right? We'll call him Ruvain. Ruvain was in strong negotiations on that piece of land, and you went and you swooped it.
That's not fair to the owner. Isn't the owner entitled to get the
very good, very good, fantastic, right? So that was the case. So he said, "I'm sorry, you're 100% right. I didn't know. It was not maliciously. I would never have done it. Had I known that he was in negotiations, I would have avoided it. I had no idea." So the Gemara has a very interesting. The Gemara says, "Now, in your opinion, would the sale be a sale or not a sale?"
It would be a sale.
If there was an agreement, then it would be a sale.
Right. So the Gemara brings down the halacha is that it is a sale. It is a sale. We obviously can't backtrack on the sale. The sale is final, but it does seem that there's different levels. I want to avoid this really for the time being. It does seem that at least to a certain extent, it would be the proper thing for him to give the land back, or whatever, sell it back. He doesn't have to take a loss on it, but at least give it or sell it back to the original suitor. So now the question that comes up is as follows. The case that the Talmud is discussing is a standard scenario where you're purchasing real estate, and another suitor comes in and steals the deal. What would you say in a scenario where there's a one-time deal going on? Let's say this is a steal of a deal. The price, the location, you name it, right? It's a once-in-a-lifetime. You hit it, you're like, this is just fell into your lap. God has given you that hug, and he's saying, this is the deal, right? This is the deal you've been waiting for your whole life. So it's a very, very unique deal. And then someone else comes in and steals it.
How could they steal it? If it's such a unique deal, why didn't the guy close the deal?
You know how it works.
Well, I mean, you snooze, you lose.
But he wasn't snoozing, he was in negotiations. I'm saying we're not discussing over here that he was delaying.
That's the point. If the negotiations are ongoing, then anyone could negotiate. If the negotiations are closed, then then he should be able to close the deal, and that's the end of it.
Is it ethical or unethical?
I think it's ethical.
You think it's ethical?
I think it's ethical, and as a practical matter, I think the owner of the land is entitled to get the highest and best price for their land.
100%.
And if there's a freeze on it, if there's a freeze on it, even before there's a final deal, then the owner is being cheated.
Well, that's also the owner, but what about the guy who's doing the poaching or the interference? Is it ethical for him?
I don't consider it interference. I mean, he's not stealing from anyone. He's honestly vying to buy the land.
Right. But you see that the Talmud is telling us that if a person who's interfering on a deal, you're not supposed to do that. You're called evil. If someone is, now again, this has to be defined. What does it mean that someone's in the middle of, in negotiations? That's a very broad term. It's very vague.
Well, I mean, if there's a final contract under American law, then if someone comes along and interferes with a contract and procures a breach of that contract, it's something we call tortious
No,
interference.
but business interest, you could also, even if it's not an enforceable contract,
No,
even American law,
even if it's not totally enforceable, if they have vested rights of some kind, then I agree, then it's a tortious interference. It depends how close the two are to.
I beg your pardon for my lack of knowledge in legal jargon, but tortious interference means at what stage?
Tortious, if there's a contract, or like Josh just said, if there's.
But then you're already discussing where there's a contract.
or advantageous
Or
business relationship.
advantageous business relationship. In other words, if I have, say I have an appointment with a guy, I come down, I fly down from Montreal to buy this land in North Miami Beach, and there's an agreement, we're gonna meet, we have a basic understanding of what the price is gonna be, and I fly down to finalize the deal, and someone comes in, then that's a tortious interference, because I already have, the makings of a contract.
Oh, so there you go. So that means in America, they say this is,
No, but in America, there's a privilege to interfere if you're doing it in free competition. Like if two people are just vying for it and I'm a competitor of yours, you can't say, oh, I'm already talking to them, so you're not allowed to compete for it, even before a deal is closed. So that's a privilege to tortiously interfere. So it's tortious interference, but you have defense.
so when do you ever have tortious
If
interference?
there's, for sure, if there's a real contract.
Well,
yeah.
tortious interference.
Well, we're talking about.
Or you're
okay, but
not,
this
or
is
you're
it.
not a
If
competitor.
there's already a
You're just
contract.
You're just want to hurt this guy. You don't like him.
Yeah.
He looked at you wrong in show, whatever it is. Meaning, then it's. But if you have your own
way-
interest, you're.
Yeah, the
Okay,
way
so-
the law talks about it, it's and this is not like a term that's defined, like it says unjustified. The interference under Florida law has to be unjustified, and then all the cases discuss what that means. Like
Right,
what are
so
the
it's a very broad
factors
term.
involved?
Okay, so is this unjustified tortious interference?
And the way
I
you
don't
laid
think
out the
so.
facts, I don't think so.
I don't think so, based on these facts.
You don't think so? Okay. Anyone else want to pipe in? You got CE credits for this. So it's like this. So now, let's progress the case a little further, and let's say, what about if it's something that's free? Someone is putting up something, right? You know, it's a little kid, you know, up for grabs, down for keeps, right? So the kid goes up for grabs, right? And someone else, and you see someone actively trying to climb over that desk, right, and tackle him to go grab that Oreo cookie from him, right? So up for grabs, and someone else comes in and takes the cookie.
Possession's 9 tenths of
I'm sorry?
one. Whoever has possession.
Whoever has possession, right? Whoever has possession. So this is really a subject of a massive debate. Rashi, who's one of the leading commentaries on the Talmud, his opinion is that tortious interference applies across the spectrum. Anytime we know someone is actively pursuing, which again has to be defined, what is actively pursuing, but anytime someone is actively pursuing a deal, it's unjust and unethical for someone, no matter what the scenario is, to come and interfere with that deal.
Well, then the person who's actively pursuing it is gonna have a price advantage, because then no one can compete with him. So therefore,
Well, not everyone needs to know.
well, if no one knows, then, you know, you can't say someone's interfering with something they don't know about.
Okay, very good. But you're hitting on all the points. Have you been here before? Huh? So now, that's so Rashi's opinion is that it applies across the spectrum. There's absolutely no restrictions. There are no exceptions. If you know someone is actively pursuing a deal, you cannot interfere with that deal. Tosfos, on the other hand, it's actually his grandson, argues on him, and he says, no, it doesn't make any sense. He said, let's put this in perspective. You have this 1 in a million deal that's coming up. He said, because someone's in negotiations, I should lose out on that deal. We're not talking about the seller. The seller, you're right. The seller, I mean, I don't know if we're going to have time to get there, but at the end of the day, everyone agrees the seller has the right from his own, right, to back out and to give the deal to the highest suitor. The question is, as Josh said, from the suitor standpoint, am I allowed to come and interfere knowing that he's already in negotiations in it? You understand the difference?
Sure.
Right? So that's, am I as a suitor allowed to interfere knowing that I may steal the deal away from someone who's in serious negotiations on this property? Right? So his grandson says that the logic doesn't make any sense. Granted that you want to say, let's say a poor person is evil. He said if a poor person is trying to go get a loaf of bread and I come and I steal it, I grab that loaf of bread away before he can get it. That's cruel, that's evil. Because if you have money, so go down to the bakery down the road and go get another loaf of bread. Why do you have to specifically go and take his loaf of bread that he's, right? Why do you have to go specifically for that loaf of bread? It's not like there's a shortage. We're not talking about, where there's a shortage of bread here. There are multiple different places that he could go to get his bread.
But
So
real estate is unique. There's only one parcel of real estate. And one
correct. So that's why we're gonna have to, right? So now in this case, we're in this scenario. He says where you have one parcel of land, and he said it's a unique deal. Why should I lose out on that because you're in negotiations? Doesn't make any sense. I also want a right to it, right? This could also be the make it or break it in my life and in my job, right? We've all been waiting for that deal to help us become financially set. So why do you have an advantage over us, right? Why should you have any advantage over me? So there's actually a subject of a massive debate, right? It's a subject of a massive it's a subject that basically of a big debate between Rashi and Taisus, and it has a lot of implications in halacha. One of the biggest applications of this is really the scenario, the case study that we brought up initially, right? The case that we brought up initially, my brother was working for Kubicki Draper. Morgan & Morgan came and solicited him basically to come over and join their firm. So now, you can make an argument that they saw an immense value in my brother. They viewed him as a very successful attorney. He was good at what he did, and they felt that he would be a massive asset to their firm. So on one hand, their argument is, listen, this is a once in a lifetime, right? Now again, that has to be defined. It's very broad, but you can make an argument that this individual, let's say it was Bill Gates, right? You had the opportunity to persuade Bill Gates to go from Microsoft to your company. Everyone would do it in a heartbeat, right? It's Bill Gates. It's a once in a million opportunity.
Well, if there's an intermediary, in other words, if there's a headhunter, the headhunter could be found liable for tortious interference. But if it's another company, they have a legitimate business interest in hiring the best qualified person.
Okay, but so let's say in a scenario where another company hires an intermediary. How does that work?
No, if a headhunter goes and let's say for instance.
Right, and he's saying
let's say for instance, I'm out to have Bill Gates join my company. So I hire a headhunter, and the headhunter goes and solicits Bill Gates and say, I could get you a better deal with stocks company than you have at Microsoft. Why don't you, consider coming over to us? And if he bites and then I negotiate with him and make a deal, the headhunter could be liable for damages. I couldn't be liable for damages because I'm trying to further my own interest. I have a business opportunity and I'm pursuing it. But the headhunter who procured the breach of the contract, they could be liable.
Okay, so really at the core of it, the way they bring it down is that this is really going to be dependent on which side of the fence you fall on. If you're of the opinion, like Rashi, like we explained, that there's absolutely no exceptions to the rule, and that it's unethical to pursue a deal in which someone else is involved in, no matter what the case is, no matter how unique of the case is, and no matter how unique of a situation it may be, so why should this be any different? Granted, my brother was viewed as a huge asset to Morgan & Morgan, but Rashi says that's not right. If right now he's currently employed by Kubicki Draper, for Morgan & Morgan to come and try to solicit him and to pull him and poach him out from his firm to come and join their firm, that's unethical. He's currently working for Kubicki Draper. Now, again, we're not discussing, I just want to make this clear, we're not discussing that my brother himself was actively pursuing another job. My brother was totally fine with Kubicki Draper at the time, right? At that time, he was okay with Kubicki Draper. Morgan & Morgan just came with a very enticing offer, right? So obviously, anytime someone comes to you with a better offer, right, you're going to start thinking twice. But if my brother has the full rights, like what you said, my brother in this scenario is selling his services to a firm, right? And essentially, we have to like wrap our minds around this a little bit. This is not the typical construct. When you're a lawyer working for a firm, essentially, from a halachic standpoint, we view the worker as a seller. Why? Because he has a skill set in which he's selling to the firm, and they're paying him, right, in return for that skill set that he's giving them, right? So he is, so to speak, if you had to brand him, he's in, so to speak, the seller, and the firm is the purchaser. He's selling his services. The firm is purchasing those purposes and paying him, right, for those services that he's offering to the firm. So the seller, I'm sorry, what's your name? Bob. As Bob pointed out, the seller really pretty much has no restrictions. There are unique cases where perhaps the seller may have some restrictions, but generally, as a general rule, a seller won't have any restrictions because it's a seller's market. We want the seller to be able to at least get the best price for his. If you're selling your property, you want to be able to feel the best. You want to be able to get the highest suitor, right? Why should I be stuck to one guy? Because so he said, obviously the seller is allowed to go to anyone. So if my brother wanted to go, I mean, again, I don't know. Again, there's different components. There are different variables because if he's under contract, maybe I don't know exactly how that works. A typical contract, what you give 6 weeks notice.
Yeah, it depends on the contract.
It depends on the contract. So what?
And there's a convention 2 weeks, but that's just a tradition, kind of.
Okay.
At will employment, anybody could leave whenever they want.
Unless there's a contract.
Unless there's a contract.
I'm saying, so if there's a contract, again, so I'm not dealing with the contract, the breach of contract, so to speak, that is a whole different animal,
But don't you
right?
have to look at what the employer's rights are? If the employer can fire your brother anytime they feel like it, why shouldn't your brother be able to leave whenever he feels like it?
Boom. And Bob, you learned. There's no doubt about it. Where'd you grow up?
From New York.
All right, so that's it. It's just automatic. It's like osmosis, just goes in. All right. Bob is definitely bringing up a point, and that is what's brought up, that in a scenario where even if you have a contract, but both of them can really essentially breach that contract. So there's, again, it's nuanced, right? But you're basically saying is that I'm never locked into a specific job. So no one really has my rights. I never committed myself, right? I'm not exactly sure myself, Bob, it's a very gray area. It has to be a little bit more defined, and I can't tell you that I could give you that definition. So I'm going to kindly step away, if you don't mind, right? But
What about the actively negotiating? Is there a definition for that?
right, so we're going to get there. So now, but by a job, if you're poaching, so according to Rashi, you would not be able to poach a worker. Taisus, on the other hand, is telling you that no, anytime it's very unique, there's no reason why one person should have a right to that over me, right? We should have equal rights to obtain that situation. So Taisus says, and this is how it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. He says that if you have a worker, if we're another company, another firm has a worker, if I hire a worker, and another Josh feels that this guy's going to be a real asset to StockCon, he has all the rights to go, and this is how we pass in halacha. He has all the rights to go and poach that worker away from me to come join his firm, because at the end of the day, this is unique. It's what he feels. Now again, that's what gets dangerous about this is that it's very subjective, right? In other words, what is Josh? What do you feel is what you believe is unique? Is it really unique, right? Again, you can make this argument practically across the boards. If I'm trying to purchase a house, I can make an argument that every single house in the world is unique, right? This one has an eat-in kitchen, the other one doesn't. I want an eat-in kitchen, right?
It has a unique location, that's for sure.
Right. It has unique location. There are multiple different, and so it gets a little, again, it gets a little gray, because once you leave it up to subjectivity, so at times the general rule that it seems to be, from my understanding going through it, is that the rule is, now again, there's obviously exceptions to every rule, but the general rule of thumb is that it has to be unique in the sense that it's universally accepted that it's unique, right? If it's a subjective, my wife, when we were looking for a house, she wanted an eat-in kitchen. 99% of the houses in North Miami Beach don't have an eat-in kitchen. They have, well, technically it's an eat-in kitchen because the kitchen, dining room, living room, everything is all in one room. So we technically have an eat-in kitchen, right? But she wanted an eat-in kitchen. So now, do you say that if we finally found that one house we've been looking for that has an eat-in kitchen, right? Do you say, oh, that's it, it's a unique house, right? Or do you say that, no, that's subjective, right? There's nothing particularly unique about this house over any other house that's on the market. It just happens to have an eat-in kitchen, right? And let's be honest. If we would have never found that house with the eat-in kitchen, right, we would have bought a different house, right? She would have settled. It's not like we're going to be living on the street on a park bench. It's a subjective view. So the halacha basically dictates when it becomes subjective, right, the subjective we don't really view as a unique. It has to be universally understood to be unique. Let's say if you want to be next to a specific synagogue, right, or you're a law firm and you want to be in a specific district, right, and in a specific area, and it's extremely hard to get a lease for whatever reason in that particular area. You can make an argument that when that lease does open up, that's very unique, because what's the likelihood of me ever finding, right, that unique storefront, right? If you're a business, this happened with Getzel. He was telling me, right, the guy had a restaurant. He had a storefront. Now, by restaurant, the frontage is one of the main components for most stores, but especially when it comes to the restaurant, you need frontage. Frontage is a very, very vital component in the business success. So if he found a specific storefront in a specific area that had unbelievable frontage, had the parking, right, was unbelievable square footage, and then someone tried coming in and get a deal. He ended up getting the deal, but someone potentially would have come in and tried to steal that deal away from him. Getzel can make it, the potential, whatever, the person trying to interfere can make an argument that this is a very unique storefront. This is not a storefront that I could find every other day of the week. This is, with this frontage, with this parking, with this is a recipe for success. I want to put my restaurant there. Why should you get your rights over me? So in such a scenario, there are no, the way we poskin, the way we go following the halacha, is that there are actually no restrictions. In such a scenario, all suitors are allowed to come in and put in their bid for such a place, right?
But it's an interesting case. There was in Hollywood, a new restaurant just opened up called Bamboo, and opened in Hollywood. Everybody in Bamboo's popular in I think north of Miami Beach, right? And they just opened up in Boca.
Boca, yeah.
Boca, and
It's a
they
Chinese
just opened
one,
up in Hollywood. So everyone's very excited. But everyone realized it's not the same Bamboo. They're using the same name, but it's not the same chain. So it's almost a lot. A lot of people obviously were like, "Wait, that's not cool, right? Using the same name and this." But I think it turns out that really it was a non-kosher restaurant that they converted to kosher. The name was Bamboo, so they left the name. But it's interesting, one, here everyone thinks they're misleading everybody, but also they just...
Right, so that could be potentially a different issue where it's like Gneva Stas. You're really stealing,
Right,
you're fooling people into thinking you're company A when really you're an entirely different breed.
Yeah, that's
Right, so the halacha does discuss such a scenario also, right? In certain cases where you're trying to sell your age. One of the discussions is, let's say someone comes for an interview by Josh, right? The guy looks like he's 95, right? Now, he may be the best lawyer in the world, right? But how much time could he actually give to the firm, right, at that age, right? So what does this guy do? He goes and he gets his lip fillers, right, and he gets his Botox, right? He covers himself. Okay, obviously it's an extreme, now you're not going to be able to cover, right? But the concept is discussed. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a whole tshuva discussing this. What happens when a potential person wants, a person vying for a job covers or does cosmetic changes to his body, right, in order to fool the employer that he's younger than his true age, right? That he's younger than his true age. So he'll dye his hair, right? Whatever. I mean, you could speak to the women over here for all the right, for all the solutions to these issues. I don't listen. I was bald at 19. You know, it made no difference. You know, I mean, there's nothing. You give me Botox and ain't gonna help, right? So there is a discussion. There is really a discussion where you're presenting yourself falsely, right? So that's really a little bit of a different discussion. Here we're discussing. The crux of the conversation is, can I make an argument that although you're involved and you're heavily negotiating the deal, which Josh, we didn't forget about you, we're going to come back to that, right? You're heavily negotiating the deal, but this is a very unique situation, and therefore I want to be able to get this store as well, because I feel that it's a recipe for success for me as well. So the halacha is you're allowed to do it. Now, one of the more vague, what seems to be vague, is what is considered hard negotiation. In other words, everyone agrees. If, let's say, there's a house up for sale and you put a bid on the house, right? Is that called negotiations? So now there's no other person, according to this, that's allowed to put, assuming again that the house is not unique in any way, shape, or form, right? No one else is allowed to put a bid on the house. That doesn't make any sense, right? That obviously doesn't make any sense for what Bob said, because that'll be terrible for the market, right? That means every seller is going to be forced to sell to the first buyer, right, that approaches him. Not because he's not allowed to, because no one else is allowed to come and approach him. So he's restricted. I mean, there's going to be no other suitors coming, right?
There needs to be competition.
Correct. So now, at what point do we consider it heavy negotiations? So the way it's brought down, and this is brought down already in the earlier commentaries, is that if there's already a pisuk damim, which is essentially what it means is we agreed on a price. Now, this means obviously we're talking about before there's a contract. Once there's a contract in place already, it seems like even the American law, that's saying that's a tortious interference, right? Tortious interference, right? So we're talking about prior to the contract. So let's say you were in bid for a house, you settled the offer, the seller accepted your offer for the house.
Verbally?
What?
Verbally?
Verbally, and you have yet to really sign a contract of any way, shape, or form, and someone comes in and offers another $30,000 on the house. Okay? That is what. So that's where they say is an issue, because over there already was a commitment from the seller's standpoint, right?
Well, maybe not. I mean, if it's an agreement to agree, then that's not considered to be a final deal.
That's just like
I have to think about an agreement to agree.
Yeah,
In other words, I said, look, I like this house, I'm willing to give you $500,000 to buy this house, but I want to conduct due diligence.
Yeah,
I
like you
want
wanna
to
do
bring
an
in my
inspection.
inspector. I want to check out the zoning because I may want to make some improvements. And those, so we are in the process of, channeling our deal, but we haven't agreed on every single.
Right. So then that wouldn't be good. Right. So then that would not be considered I mean, that's
It's not
obviously
like
negotiations, but that would not be
it's-
considered that wouldn't be considered negotiations. That would be subject to these rules.
Right, but we.
But we're talking about in a
we
scenario where it
already
progressed
agreed
even
on
further than that. Let's say you brought your inspector down, you have done your due diligence.
I'm just waiting for Josh to draw up the paper.
You're waiting for Josh to draw up the papers.
Well, in that case, there's a meeting of the buyers, that's not really a negotiation anymore, it's not a heavy negotiation, they've agreed on.
That,
the
right. So in
terms.
other words, it's
They're just
surpassed
waiting to
negotiation.
sign.
Correct. Correct.
So what happens, like in my case, I spoke to the guy and I said, okay, I offered 850, he said he wanted 900. So, but we had a meeting of minds that it would be between 850 and 900. No one disagreed on that. And then when he brought the other buyer in, then all of a sudden he's like, actually I want 950.
All right, Bob. What do you think? Bob, we're asking you because you're the
No,
Talmud
if
expert
there-
here.
If there was a spread between 850 and 9, there was no contract.
There's no
Because
contract.
we were prepared to pay 9, and the
But-
seller could have said, look, I'm not gonna sell for it.
I'm not telling you not to be disappointed that you didn't get the deal, but it's definitely you can't make an argument that you didn't have a price over there.
The fact
You had a
that
potential
you know,
price.
You
The
know
fact
that
that you're
the price.
chasing it, the fact that you're chasing it for 4 months, that doesn't do anything.
Right. So now, right.
You invested time, effort, and money. You bought him presents, and you worked your relationship.
Yeah,
there.
but how does that, I understand the detriment to the person that put in the time, but how does that affect the seller? The seller could say, so what? You put in time, you did it for yourself, you took a known risk, and now I can get more money. Why should I sell?
You're
it?
talking about
No,
even
we're
in a
not-
scenario.
we're not
In which
selling.
scenario?
The scenario that we're talking about with the house.
No, Bob, but we all know the seller can do whatever he wants. We're talking about the guy that's coming on the side. The seller for sure could say that. The question is the guy that's coming on the side. So he sees you working your neighbor for 4 months, someone in your neighborhood, you're working a relationship with them, he watches it. He puts it out, and he comes in and undercuts you.
But it's not undercutting. I mean, he's doing it for himself. He's taking a known risk, and he's trying to do something to benefit himself. That's part of commerce.
That's part of commerce, right? So in other words, to loop back to that case. So one of the case studies we gave is that someone that was working very hard for 4 months, invested time, money, and energy to try and convince a potential a seller on the block, or someone that owned the house on the block to sell to them. In that scenario, there was no even negotiations. I mean, they had a potential, they said they would sell it, they never agreed on any price in any way, shape, or form. So why should I be restricted, right, from putting in a bid on the house, right? Like Bob said, we want the seller to be able to get the highest bid on the house. We don't want to restrict him, right? We don't want to restrict him. And in this case, you didn't really put the fact that you spent time, money, and energy, we feel bad for you, and maybe you'll learn your lesson next time, right? And you'll buy cheaper chocolate cake, right? Because it just may not pan out at the end. But that was the risk that you were willing to take. That was the risk that you were taking when you were getting involved. You knew that there's a possibility, A, that they may not even be willing to sell after all the due diligence that you did. And B, you knew that there's a potential that someone else may come in and convince them to sell to them over you. You understood that going in. So you can't come and complain to us afterwards, well, I spent a lot of time, money, and energy, I think I should have. Granted, I feel bad for you. I'm not saying we're not discussing feelings over here. We agree, but sometimes the law doesn't take feelings into account. Right.
That happens all the time. People, when they go for house hunting, they drive around, they spend time, money, and effort to find something that's suitable, and that's part of doing business. Realtors take clients to different houses all the time, and they spend a ton of money, and they hope that eventually they can put the deal together, but, just because they put in the effort doesn't give them the right to insist that a client, for instance, buy a particular property. Or just because someone has spent a lot of time house hunting doesn't give them the right to kind of corner the market on a particular property that they like.
So Bob is there. So Bob, we're going to sit you on the bed then, right? I think you're going to be adjudicating these cases from now on, right? So now, Bob is 100% right. So in that scenario, everyone agrees that anyone who wants is really allowed to put in their bid on the house. The fact that I invested time to try to convince you to sell it is not a variable in this equation, and therefore it's not a problem. Now, in the case of the apartment building, where you had someone that you committed, so again, I specifically constructed the case that 4,000, there was a range in the rent, right, from 4 to 45, let's say, or 4 to 5, whatever you may see, right? There was a range in the rent, and you negotiated with the guy to give you at 4. Now, before the contract that was sent out to you, another person came in and offered 45. So now, obviously, from the apartment complex's vantage point, they want to take the second suitor. They're going to be making more money monthly. Now, in that scenario, it gets a little bit more complex, because over there was already a verbal commitment from the apartment. Now, I think you'll understand this. What's Bob's argument that the whole time he's screaming over there at me, right? What's his whole argument the whole time? The seller, right? We want the seller to get the best deal. Well, can't you make an argument in this case? The seller understood that there was a range. It was between 4 to 45. He settled on 4. What does that mean? That means essentially he's telling you he's perfectly fine taking 4. In fact, he may even rather settle now and get a 4 than wait another potential week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks till someone that comes in to 45. So what essentially he's saying when he commits to the $4,000 is that he doesn't have an issue, or he doesn't necessarily view it as a loss to sign at 4 over 45.
I don't see that. I mean, I think what the
Josh, you
issue
always want
is,
more fucking?
the issue is whether or not the issue is whether or not they agree. If they agree.
They agreed. In other words, the case was.
Then it should be over.
No, but the contract was never sent. In other words, there was nothing signed. There was a verbal commitment there was said, I'm going to tell my leasing agent to forward the email to you with the contract the moment.
I mean, let's say, for instance, I'm representing a client in a case, and it's a hotly contested case, and we agree to a settlement, the settlement terms. And the settlement terms involve agreement to a release. Now, a release is pretty much a standard document. That's an enforceable contract, even though it's not fully signed, because we agreed on all the essential terms, and now there's a non-essential term of this release, or what it's gonna be. And the same thing here. We have agreed on all the essential terms, and the issue of the contract, it depends if it's material or not material. If it's just simply boilerplate, agreeing to standard terms, then it's a contract.
See, even without any physical contract.
Yes. If there are unknown variables that still have to be sorted out.
No, I agree. This is standard leasing. I mean, this is not
But
rocket science. In other words, I'm saying from the leasing office perspective, this is a standard case. The guy came in, they negotiated, settled at 4. We're gonna send you the contract, sign it, send it in. Your lease will start next month, right? At the beginning of the next month, right? The secretary was out, so he was waiting for the secretary. In the interim, another person called him and was willing to give 45.
Well, I mean, in real estate, it's a little bit different because of, like David pointed out, the statute of frauds. But in general, commerce, if all the essential terms are agreed upon, then it's a contract. You have something that you can enforce.
Mm-hmm.
So if like in the case I mentioned with a settlement, okay, so we can't agree to a release. So you write the release and I'll sign it. I don't care really what it says, but I want the money. We agreed on a price, so that's an enforceable contract.
Right. So that is, Bob, he could sit on the bed then. The guy, you're hired, right?
I just heard a wild Bisden case where there was a nursing home deal that was in contract, and the buyers put down a $3 million deposit in contract. During the contract, there was an increase in Medicaid or Medicare rates, and which increased the value of the portfolio or the property significantly. The seller said, and they were hard. The buyer was hard on their deposit, and the seller came back and said, "I want out." And obviously, the buyer said, "No, I'm not. We're hard. We're closing soon." And they took it to Besdin, and this I just don't understand. And Besdin agreed with the seller, said there was no physical kinyan that actually happened, so we'll cancel the contract.
Right. Okay. I mean, I don't know all the details of the case.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's a lot more
If
nuanced
you heard
than.
it from the loser, you probably
Right. So I can't say I don't know all the details, but there is such a concept. In other words, let's just finish. We'll come back to you in 1 second, right? So let's just finish. So again, in the case where it's 4,000 to 45, the standard halacha is that he's not allowed to back out in such a deal, because since you committed to the 4, you can't come with an argument now that I'm losing money by not getting that potential suitor, because you seem to be okay with that. You understood there was a window, right, a range in which you could that your lease was subject to, and you were okay with taking the $4,000, right? So you don't, in other words, you're not viewing the lack of the $500 as a significant loss that you can now begin to argue. Not now, what happens if there was all of a sudden there was a dearth of apartments and someone came and was willing to pay you, I don't know, let's just make an extreme. He's willing to pay you $5,500, right? So you settled on 4, and someone's coming willing to pay you $1,500 more, right? Completely out of the range in which you assumed that it was going to do, right? That it was going to be. There, they say he would be allowed to back out if he would want to, because in that scenario, the seller can make an argument that there was no reason for me to assume that I'd be getting anything. The only reason why I committed to you was because my assumption was that this was going to be a standard deal. I didn't dream that I would get an offer, right, $1,500 more than what I was expecting. Now that it's so above the realm, so you say that it can make up. So it could be, again, I don't know all the details, but it could be maybe that's where the best things come from. In this scenario where you had a nursing home that had a portfolio and it was valued at X, and then all of a sudden from left field they up the Medicaid and now the value triples, they can make an argument that, listen, this is a completely different ballpark now. We were selling you A no longer exists, right? This portfolio in which we were selling you does not exist anymore. We're selling you this is a whole different animal. We never agreed to sell you this, right? This is an elephant. I was selling you a donkey, you know what I mean? This is like an entirely different breed. So it's possible, again, I don't know all the details, but it's possible that maybe that was one of the factors that played into that.
Don't you have to look at it, what happens if, for instance, Medicaid came out and reduced the things, and then all of a sudden the property is worth less? Can the guy back out?
Right.
The guy can't.
100%. That's discussed in Allah as well. 100%. Yeah, but those are these are very serious cases. I mean, obviously they're very nuanced. So you're gonna have
That
to.
would be the same argument in reverse, right?
Yeah.
It would be the same.
Us-
Whatever argument you're gonna see for the
Right.
seller
In
to
other words,
have
if you
to
could
give
say
the
that
buyer-
you knew that there was a possibility that the Medicaid was going to go up, right? I don't know. This is possible.
Well, why do you, why is there a particular, concept, the fact that there's a closing really shouldn't matter? The guy says, look, I anticipated that I bought this business, blah, 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 on a certain premise, and now it's worth much less, and it's gonna be ruinous to me if I continue, I want my money back. Why is there a particular point in time when the deal can't be undone?
I mean,
It's closed.
once you close, then you
You're
understand.
not closed.
So what?
No. Oh, you are closed?
Yeah, so.
Well, I mean, so that means, so what is you have bad luck? You know what I mean?
No, so you could undo a closing. I mean, I think the question
could.
is whether or not there's a contract. If there's a contract that could be enforced one way or the other, both parties can't get out of it.
No, that's true. If there's a contract, then it's much harder to get out. But you're discussing already before, I thought. Post-contract is a whole different animal. I mean,
Jody's case was already, they were under contract.
They were under
They already
contract,
gave a
yeah.
deposit.
They're under contract,
Just
hard
gives-
deposit already.
no, but they didn't close yet.
They
I'm
didn't
saying,
close,
well,
yeah,
right? They didn't close yet. That was the difference. I mean, once you close the deal, it's done. You know what I mean?
The
You
example
just
was-
got
I
you were
agree
dealt a
with
bad hand. You know what I mean?
I
That
agree
poker
with
game.
that.
That's what happens.
Your
That
example
happens
was
sometimes
before
where
contract.
we're seeing now where documents are forged, right? They're forged, they're misrepresented,
misrepresented.
yeah. And you come back and says this is not what we agreed on.
Right. Okay. So those were the basic three case studies that were presented, just as an outline. So the Morgan and Morgan, right, which we came out. That would be certainly if you felt again. You have to know that that's also subjective, right? Is my brother really the best lawyer you'll ever find, right? I mean, maybe he might be. I don't
Sure
know.
he is.
Well, yeah, he may be.
There's always a ghost.
He's doing very well at Morgan and Morgan. I'll tell you that much. You know what I mean? But then you can make an argument that they're allowed to pursue him, right? If he's a regular standard lawyer, they don't see him any way overly excelling over than any other lawyer that they would find in this field. Then you can make an argument that you're not allowed to do that, right? There's nothing unique about him versus as opposed to any other lawyer entering the field. Now again, if the options are getting a rookie, right, someone straight out of law school, that's obviously different. That's a different animal because you have to train him in and he has to learn the ropes of the field. So that again could be a variable involved as well. In the case of the apartment building, we said that as long as it was within the range that you thought you would be able to get for your lease, and you settled, you wouldn't be able to back out. And then what was the third and final case? What was it? Oh, in the case of the house where the guy invested time, money, and effort really to just due diligence to get the sellers to sell. That's not a variable at all, and therefore anyone who wants would be allowed to put in an offer. Thank you very much for your time.
So according to Rashi, he says that under all circumstances, you can.
Yeah,
always-
so Rashi learns.
No mejor, no mejor.
Rashi learns.
Yeah? Sure.
I don't mind,
We have a minute, you guys want a diamond?
How about it?
Okay, we have 10 right here, right?
People can stay up.
Yeah, you want a diamond?
Is your brother Benjamin?
Benjamin.
I